The more you try to be liked, the more you slowly erase yourself. You don't notice it at first. It feels harmless, even logical. You smile a little more. You soften your opinions. You filter your words before they leave your mouth. You tell yourself it's maturity, social intelligence, adaptation. But if you're honest, you already feel the cost. There are moments, quiet, uncomfortable moments, where you realize people don't really see you. They see a version of you that was designed to be accepted, safe, easy, replaceable. And that's the part no one warned you about. You think being liked is the goal, but actually, being liked is often the mask you wear when you're afraid of being ignored. You think people respect you because they don't reject you, but actually, they just don't feel anything strong enough to resist. And most people never realize this, because they confuse the absence of conflict with the presence of value. You've been there, in conversations where you nod even when you disagree, in situations where you say, "It's fine," when it's not. You laugh at things you don't find funny, agree with ideas you don't believe in, accept treatment you don't deserve. Not because you're weak, but because somewhere along the way, you were taught that being accepted is safer than being real. And at first, it works. People don't argue with you. They don't exclude you. You fit in. You blend. You become easy to keep around. But slowly, something shifts. You start to feel invisible in rooms where you are physically present. Your words carry less weight. Your silence goes unnoticed. Your presence doesn't change the energy. And deep down, there's a quiet frustration you can't quite explain. Because you're doing everything right, yet something feels fundamentally wrong. That's the trap. The system was never designed to reward you for being agreeable. It was designed to test whether you can hold your ground under pressure. But no one tells you that. Instead, they feed you a softer narrative. Be nice, be kind, be likable, and everything will fall into place. But reality doesn't work like that. Reality is colder, more precise, more honest. People don't assign value based on how comfortable you make them feel. They assign value based on how you make them adjust. And right now, if you're constantly adjusting yourself to fit others, you've already lost the position without realizing it. You felt it in subtle ways. When someone interrupts you and you let it slide. When your opinion gets overlooked and you don't push back. When you're always the one accommodating, always the one understanding, always the one bending. You call it patience. They call it permission. Permission to treat you as optional. And the more you allow it, the more it becomes your identity in their eyes. Not because they're evil, not because they're trying to dominate you, but because human nature operates on signals. And every time you suppress yourself to be liked, you send a signal. I am not a priority. That signal spreads quietly. It shapes how people talk to you, how they listen to you, how they remember you, or forget you. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because the problem isn't them. It's the pattern you've built. A pattern of trading authenticity for approval, of choosing short-term comfort over long-term respect. And once that pattern sets in, it becomes your default. You start anticipating reactions before you even speak. You edit yourself in real time. You become hyper-aware of how you're being perceived, constantly adjusting, constantly calibrating, constantly shrinking. And the worst part is, you don't even call it shrinking anymore. You call it being easygoing. But there's a difference between being easygoing and being invisible. One is a choice. The other is a consequence. And right now, you're standing in that consequence. You can feel it in the way conversations drift past you, in the way decisions happen without your input, in the way your presence doesn't command attention. It requests permission. That's not status. That's survival. And survival is quiet, passive, reactive. It keeps you in the room, but it never lets you lead it. So you try harder. You become more helpful, more available, more agreeable. You think if you just give a little more, say the right thing, be a little better, people will finally see your value. But that's the illusion tightening its grip. Because the more you give without boundaries, the less each piece of you is worth. Scarcity creates value, not abundance. And right now, you are too available to be valued, too predictable to be respected, too safe to be remembered. Let that sink in. This isn't about becoming cold or arrogant. It's about seeing clearly, about recognizing that the way you've been operating is costing you more than it's giving you. You're not being rejected, but you're not being chosen either. You're tolerated, not prioritized, included, but not influential. And if you stay on this path, nothing dramatic will happen. There won't be a sudden collapse, no obvious failure, just a slow, quiet drift into irrelevance. A life where you're always present, but rarely impactful. Always liked, but never truly respected. And that's the brutal truth no one says out loud. Being liked is easy. It requires you to dilute yourself just enough to fit everyone's expectations. But being respected, that requires something else entirely. It requires friction, boundaries, the willingness to be misunderstood. And right now, you're avoiding all of that. You've been trained to smooth out every edge, to remove every sharp corner of your personality, to become as acceptable as possible. But in doing so, you've removed the very thing that makes you distinct. You've become neutral. And neutral doesn't attract attention. It doesn't command space. It doesn't shift dynamics. It just exists, quietly, in the background. So here's the question you've been avoiding. How much of yourself have you edited out just to be liked? And more importantly, what has that cost you? Because the answer isn't theoretical. You feel it every day. In the lack of influence, in the absence of respect, in the subtle way people don't take you seriously. That's not random. That's the result of a pattern. A pattern you can change, but only if you're willing to see it for what it is. And most people never do. They stay trapped in the cycle, chasing approval, mistaking politeness for power, confusing acceptance with status. They never step back long enough to realize that the game they're playing was never designed for them to win. But you're starting to see it now, the cracks in the illusion, the quiet truth underneath all the noise. And once you see it, you can't go back to pretending. You were told that if you are good to people, people will be good to you. And at some level, you still believe that, even after all the evidence that says otherwise, because it is comforting. It gives you a sense of control. It makes the world feel fair. But the truth is much colder than that. People don't operate on fairness. They operate on perception. And perception is shaped by signals, not intentions. And right now, the signal you are sending is not strength. It is compliance, not presence but accommodation. And the brutal part is this. The more you try to prove your value by giving more, the more people unconsciously reduce your value because they no longer need to earn access to you. And when access is free, it is rarely respected. This is the first fracture in your belief system. The moment you realize that effort does not equal status, and kindness without boundaries becomes weakness in the eyes of those who are constantly scanning for hierarchy. And you can deny it, you can resist it, but you have already experienced it too many times for it to be coincidence. You've seen less capable people command more respect. You've watched louder, more disagreeable individuals dominate rooms while you, who tried to be fair, balanced, thoughtful, were quietly overlooked. And that confusion you feel, that silent frustration, comes from the gap between what you were taught and how the world actually works. And until you close that gap, you will keep repeating the same pattern expecting a different outcome. Now understand this deeper layer. Human beings are not just responding to what you say, they are responding to what you represent. And what you represent is communicated through subtle behaviors, micro decisions, small hesitations, the way you hold eye contact, the speed at which you respond, the willingness you show to disagree or not. All of these form a psychological profile in the minds of others, and they do this instantly, without conscious thought. They categorize you as either someone who holds value or someone who seeks it. And the difference is everything, because the one who holds value does not need approval, while the one who seeks it will always be chasing. And chasing is inherently lower status. Even if your intentions are pure, even if your character is good, the perception overrides it, because perception is faster than logic. This is why you can feel disrespected even when you've done nothing wrong, because respect is not a moral reward. It is a psychological response to perceived power. And power is often quiet, controlled, selective. It does not rush to prove itself. It does not over-explain. It does not fill silence out of fear. It allows tension to exist without collapsing under it. And that is where most people fail, because tension is uncomfortable, and you have been conditioned to eliminate discomfort as quickly as possible. So when a moment of silence appears, you rush to fill it. When someone challenges you, you soften your stance. When there is a risk of disagreement, you pivot toward agreement. And each of these moments feels small, insignificant even, but together they build a pattern of retreat. And people notice patterns. Even if they cannot articulate them, they feel them, and they respond accordingly. Now picture a real situation, not an abstract idea, but something you have lived through. You are in a conversation, maybe at work, maybe with friends, maybe in a setting where opinions matter. Someone presents an idea. You disagree. Internally, you can see the flaw. You can feel the urge to speak, but you hesitate. You calculate the risk. You wonder how it will be received. You imagine the tension it might create. And in that split second, you choose safety. You nod. You stay quiet. Or worse, you agree. And the conversation moves on. But something subtle has just happened. You have traded your voice for comfort. And everyone in that interaction has registered, consciously or not, that your position is flexible, that your stance is negotiable, that your presence does not challenge the environment. And from that moment on, your weight in that group shifts slightly downward, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to change future interactions. Now compare that to someone else in the same situation. They don't speak more, they don't dominate, but when they do speak, they are clear, they are firm, they are willing to create a small amount of friction, not aggressively, not emotionally, but calmly. And that calm disagreement introduces tension, and that tension demands attention, and that attention builds presence. And over time, presence becomes authority, not because they are louder, but because they are less willing to dilute themselves. This is the difference you keep missing. It's not about being dominant, it's about being defined. And right now, you are too undefined, too adaptable, too fluid in your identity, which makes you easy to accept but hard to respect. So the first rule you need to internalize is this: stop negotiating your core just to maintain comfort. If you believe something, say it, not loudly, not emotionally, but clearly, and accept the tension that follows, because that tension is the price of being taken seriously. And if you are not willing to pay that price, you will continue to be perceived as optional. The second rule goes deeper into your behavior patterns. You need to control your availability, and this is where most people misunderstand the concept. They think it's about playing games, delaying responses, creating artificial distance, but that's not the point. The point is to break the habit of immediate compliance, because right now, you respond too quickly. You agree too easily. You make yourself too accessible, and accessibility without selectivity reduces perceived value. Think about it. Anything that is always available becomes background noise. And you have become background noise in too many interactions. Not because you lack intelligence or capability, but because you have removed all friction from accessing you. So people don't need to invest. They don't need to wait. They don't need to adjust. And without investment, there is no perceived value. So you need to introduce space, not as a tactic, but as a standard. You don't have to reply instantly. You don't have to say yes immediately. You don't have to be everywhere, every time, for everyone. And when you start creating that space, something interesting happens. People begin to recalibrate. They notice your absence. They feel the shift. And they start assigning more weight to your presence when it does appear. Because now it is not guaranteed. And what is not guaranteed becomes more valuable. This is not manipulation. This is correction. You are correcting an imbalance that you created through overavailability. Now, the third rule is the hardest, because it goes against your emotional instincts. You need to detach from outcomes. And this is where your internal tension is the strongest, because you want to be liked, you want to be accepted, you want to maintain harmony, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. But when that desire controls your behavior, it weakens your position, because you become reactive, you adjust based on feedback, you seek validation in real time, and the moment you sense disapproval, you try to fix it, you over-explain, you justify, you soften, and all of that communicates insecurity. Not because you are insecure, but because your behavior reflects it, and behavior is what people respond to. So you need to develop the ability to hold your position without needing immediate validation, to say something and let it stand, to express an opinion and not rush to defend it unless necessary, to allow someone to disagree without feeling the need to correct the emotional atmosphere. This is what detachment looks like in practice. It is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is stability. And stability under pressure is one of the strongest signals of high status, because it shows that your sense of self is not dependent on external reactions. And when people sense that, they adjust. They become more careful, more attentive, more respectful, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior set a boundary they can feel. Now step back and see the pattern forming. You stop overgiving. You start holding your ground. You create space. You detach from immediate approval. And slowly, the dynamic changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but consistently. People begin to listen more when you speak. They interrupt less. They consider your opinions more seriously. Not because you asked them to, but because your signals changed. And signals shape perception, and perception shapes behavior, and behavior shapes status. This is the loop you have been stuck in, and now you are beginning to break it. But understand this, the process is uncomfortable, because you are stepping out of a pattern that has protected you for a long time. Being agreeable kept you safe. It minimized conflict, it reduced risk, but it also limited your growth, your influence, your presence. And now you are trading that safety for something else, something less comfortable but more powerful. And your mind will resist. It will tell you to go back, to smooth things over, to avoid tension, to maintain the old equilibrium. But if you give in, you reset the pattern. You go back to being liked but not respected, present but not impactful. And you have to decide which version of yourself you are willing to live with, because both come with a cost. One is the cost of discomfort. The other is the cost of invisibility. And most people choose invisibility because it feels easier in the moment. But over time, it becomes unbearable, because you know you are capable of more. You feel it, even now. There is a part of you that recognizes this truth, that understands why certain people command respect without trying, why their presence shifts the room, why their words carry weight. And it's not because they are inherently better, it's because they are less willing to compromise their core for acceptance. They are comfortable with a level of tension that you have been avoiding, and that comfort creates space, and that space creates authority. So the next time you are in an interaction, don't focus on being liked. Focus on being clear. Don't rush to fill silence. Let it exist. Don't agree immediately. Consider your stance. Don't over-explain. Say what needs to be said and stop. These are small shifts, but they compound. And over time, they redefine how people perceive you. And once perception changes, everything else follows. Because the truth is simple, even if it is hard to accept. Being liked is easy. It requires you to adjust yourself to others. But being respected requires others to adjust to you. And that shift only happens when you stop chasing approval and start holding your position. And once you cross that line, once you feel the difference, you will never want to go back, because you will realize that what you were chasing all along was not approval, it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement only comes when you stop hiding behind the need to be liked and start standing in who you actually are. Everything comes down to this: not how many people smile at you, not how many people include you, not how many people say they like you, but how people behave when you are present, how they adjust, how they measure their words, how they respond to your silence. Because status is not what people say about you, it is what they subconsciously do around you. And if you look back honestly at your own life, you will see the pattern clearly. You will see moments where you were liked but ignored, included but not considered, welcomed but not respected. And those moments were not accidents. They were reflections of how you positioned yourself. Because every time you chose comfort over clarity, every time you avoided tension, every time you diluted your stance to maintain harmony, you trained people to see you as flexible. And flexible becomes secondary, adjustable, optional. And optional people do not shape environments. They adapt to them. They wait. They follow. They react. And over time, that role becomes your identity. Not because you lack capability, but because you never demanded a different position through your behavior. And this is where the truth becomes heavy, because it removes excuses, it removes blame. It forces you to see that the dynamic you experience is not random. It is constructed, built slowly through hundreds of small decisions where you chose to be accepted instead of being defined. And now you stand at a point where you can no longer pretend you don't see it. Because once you understand this pattern, once you feel how deeply it has shaped your interactions, you cannot go back to ignorance. You either change it or you accept the consequences of staying the same. And staying the same means continuing to live in a space where you are liked but not impactful, present but not powerful, visible but not significant. And that is a quiet kind of frustration that builds over time, because you know you are capable of more. You feel it in your thoughts, in your observations, in the things you don't say, in the boundaries you don't set, in the reactions you suppress. There is a stronger version of you that has been held back by the need to be accepted, and that need has cost you more than you realize. It has cost you influence. It has cost you respect. It has cost you the ability to shape your environment instead of being shaped by it. And if you want to change that, if you want to step into a different position, you must accept a different set of rules. Rules that are less comfortable but more real. Rules that do not guarantee approval but create presence. And the final rule is simple, but it carries weight. If you want to be respected, you must be willing to be misunderstood. Because clarity creates division, and division creates tension, and tension reveals hierarchy. And most people avoid this entire chain because they are afraid of the first step. They are afraid of being seen differently, of being judged, of being labeled. So they stay neutral, they stay agreeable, they stay safe, and in doing so, they remain invisible in the ways that matter. But if you step out of that pattern, if you allow yourself to be clear, to hold your stance, to not rush to smooth every interaction, something shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently. People begin to recalibrate around you. They start to listen more carefully. They hesitate before dismissing you. They consider your reactions. Because now your presence carries weight, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped giving it away so easily. And this is where the deeper truth settles in. Most people will never understand this, not because it is complex, but because it is uncomfortable. It requires them to confront their own patterns, their own compromises, their own fear of tension. And most people would rather stay in a familiar discomfort than step into an unfamiliar strength. They will continue chasing approval, measuring their worth through how easily they are accepted, not realizing that acceptance without respect is a hollow victory. It feels good in the moment, but it leaves you empty in the long run, because you are not being valued for who you are. You are being tolerated for how well you fit. And fitting is not the same as leading, not the same as influencing, not the same as being remembered. And you have to decide what you actually want, not what sounds good, not what feels safe, but what aligns with the reality you now see. Because if you truly want presence, if you truly want to walk into a room and feel the shift, if you want your words to carry weight, your silence to hold meaning, your boundaries to be respected without constant enforcement, then you must let go of the need to be liked by everyone. You must accept that some people will misunderstand you, some will disagree, some will feel uncomfortable around your clarity, and that is not a problem to fix. It is a signal that you are no longer diluting yourself to fit every expectation, and that signal is what creates distinction, and distinction is what creates status. Because people do not remember the most agreeable person in the room, they remember the one who stood for something, who held their ground, who did not collapse under subtle pressure. And that memory shapes future interactions. It builds a reputation that speaks before you even say a word. And once that reputation forms, you no longer need to prove yourself constantly, because your behavior has already established a pattern that others recognize. And this is the shift you are moving toward, from proving to being, from seeking to holding, from adjusting to defining. And it will feel unfamiliar at first. There will be moments where you question yourself, where you feel the urge to revert, to smooth things over, to regain that easy acceptance. But if you give in, you reinforce the old pattern, you reset the dynamic, and you return to a position that you already know does not satisfy you. So you have to stay aware. You have to catch those moments in real time, the hesitation before you speak, the impulse to agree when you don't, the urge to explain yourself unnecessarily. And in those moments, you choose differently. You pause, you hold, you speak with clarity, or you choose silence intentionally, not out of fear, but out of control. And that control is what builds presence, not loudness, not dominance, but controlled expression, measured responses, selective engagement. These are the traits that signal strength in a way that words cannot replicate. And over time, they reshape how people interact with you. They adjust, they calibrate, they respond differently, because you are no longer predictable in the old way. You are no longer the one who always accommodates, always agrees, always makes it easy. You become someone who requires consideration, and that requirement elevates your position, not through force, but through perception. And perception is the foundation of social dynamics. So understand this final truth clearly. Being liked is a byproduct, not a goal. If you chase it directly, you lose yourself. You dilute your presence, you weaken your position. But if you focus on being clear, being grounded, being selective, being willing to hold tension, then respect follows. Not from everyone, but from the right people. The ones who recognize strength, who respond to stability, who adjust to clarity. And those are the interactions that matter, because they reinforce a different version of you. A version that does not need to seek approval to feel secure. A version that does not collapse under subtle pressure. A version that understands that status is not given, it is signaled, and those signals are under your control. Every moment, every interaction, every decision to speak or stay silent, to agree or to challenge, to explain or to let things stand. All of it builds the image that people respond to. And now you are aware of it. Now you can no longer claim ignorance. You see the pattern. You feel the difference. And that awareness is the first step. But it means nothing without action. So the next time you step into a conversation, don't default to your old habits. Don't rush to be liked. Don't smooth every edge. Allow a little friction. Hold your position. Observe the reactions. Feel the shift. Because that shift is real. It is subtle but powerful. And once you experience it, once you see how differently people respond when you stop chasing approval and start embodying clarity, you will understand why this matters, why it changes everything, and why most people never reach this point, because they never step out of their comfort long enough to see what lies beyond it. But you have seen it now, even if only for a moment, and that moment is enough to change your trajectory, if you choose to act on it, if you choose to stop hiding behind likability and start standing in something stronger, something quieter, something more controlled. Because in the end, the difference between being liked and being respected is the difference between being accepted into the room and owning your place within it. And once you understand that, once you internalize it deeply enough to act on it without hesitation, you stop asking for space, and you start becoming the reason space is made. And that is a level most people will never reach, not because they cannot, but because they are not willing to let go of the comfort that is holding them back. So watch this again, not to hear the words, but to see yourself in them, to recognize the patterns you've been repeating, and to decide, clearly, whether you are ready to break them or continue living inside them.